So as you see, the title is very complicated, so I will not repeat that. But as you guess, I'm presenting APIC Leak today. And OK, I can already see it's like some of you, does this work? Yes. Thinking, OK, come on, this is yet another CPU bug. What the fuck, we are like done with it. It's like the 25th one. And OK, yeah, I mean, I can see that. But every single CPU bug that we like had previous from this one have something in common. And the thing is, they all rely on side channels. And OK, implementing a side channel is like very complex to get it right. It's super noisy. You will have like errors. You will have to repeat your talk like thousands of times to like have some leak that makes sense. And you will have errors. And everyone says, OK, this is like academic work. It doesn't work. No one will like never use that. So, I mean, I was wondering, why can we have something that is easier to implement, something that literally can leak the data architecturally? And if I'm here on stage, obviously the answer is yes. And today I will present you APIC Leak. That's not yet another side channel. And to demonstrate you that, we will go through that and like understand what's APIC Leak. So APIC Leak is the first architectural bug that leaks data without any side channel, no side channel at all. It is not a transient execution attack either. It doesn't use speculation or transient faults in the CPU. It deterministically leaks data even from SGX-enclaves, that is like the highest protected place in the CPU. And no hyperthreading is required either. So you don't even know to do like port contentional side channels between multiple threadings so that Intel can just say, OK, just disable hyperthreading and you're done. No. And it affects, sorry, oh, this is trash. OK, it affects all or most of the latest CPU from Intel. So, OK, no one cares about the outline. You will see that. And let's just answer, what is APIC Leak? And to answer that, we will first have to see, OK, what is actually the APIC, where the name comes from? And the APIC stands for Advanced Programmable Interrupt Controller. I got it right. And it's actually like a component inside the CPU whose focus is to generate, receive, and forward interrupts in modern CPUs. You have local APICs like inside each of the CPUs, and you have one I/O APIC that generates interrupts toward external devices. The APIC can be programmed through the APIC registers that by default are memory mapped. The location in the physical memory is controlled by an MSR, so that in the physical memory, you will have those APIC registers that you can use, so like overwrite or read to program, for example, the APIC timer interrupts. That's the interrupt that your CPU constantly receives to like make it alive. Every single APIC register is mapped as a 32-bit value, and all the APIC registers are aligned to 16 bytes. This means that you have like a lot of the bytes in the APIC MMIO region that should not be accessed. So all the bytes through 4, like from 4 through 15, should never be accessed. And if you like try to understand why, you can read the Intel manual, and it says, OK, any access that touches those bytes causes undefined behavior. And this undefined behavior like includes hangs, incorrect results, or even unexpected exceptions. And this is like very tempting. It's like when you see a sign with "do not touch" on like in a shop, you go and touch it. So yeah, let's try this and let's touch those bytes. Come on. So this is the basic POC of APIC Leak, and it's so simple that even fits in a tweet or on Mastodon like next week. So it's super simple. We will just want to see what will happen if we like map those physical memory and access the bytes that we shouldn't be able to access. So as I told you before, this is a physical address, so we have to map this address. And then we can start dumping. Why this is so much slow? Come on, OK. And you can start dumping the APIC MMIO region. And OK, in the first one, there's the defined APIC MMIO register. Nothing much interesting will happen. It's a defined, it's, I don't know, timer interrupt APIC register. It's 0 now, and that's fine. But we can try to like read those bytes, and like we read again, and we start seeing something. And here, something is happening. we are seeing data. And this is literally the first string I leaked from a CPU. And it's like a warning, and definitely the APIC shouldn't have a warning unless Intel wanted to tell us, hey, please don't touch this memory. But that's literally data that we're leaking. If we continue to leak data, we are continuing to leak, to architecturally leak just by dumping the APIC stale values in the CPU. And we can see data that is leaked, but also we can continue and see other stuff. And in this case, it's instructions. We can even disassemble that and see that, okay, we're leaking data, we're leaking instruction. What is happening? We are literally reading undefined ranges in the APIC, and we are seeing data that shouldn't be there. And okay, on most CPUs, this is not doing much. Okay, you either read zeros or Fs, or even the CPU hangs, or even triple faults and resets itself. But on some of the newer CPUs, you see data and you leak stuff. So we should try to understand, okay, but what is happening? What data are we seeing now? Where are we leaking from? And we can try to design experiments that try to tell us, okay, here we see the data that is arriving from this region inside the CPU. Every single one of these experiments will allow us to remove hypotheses from where we leak data from. So we can start by trying to, for example, have some data kept in the register, do some, I don't know, arithmetic computation in the data, and try to dump the APIC to see if we are leaking those data that we are computing from. And this doesn't happen. We can continue and try to leak data from the caches, maybe do some memory read and memory write that I don't know, touches memory, but not that much memory that gets flushed by the cache. And here, we still don't see that data. We can do more, and we can try to see if we can leak data from other CPU cores. And from those cores, we still don't see that memory. But the problem is that we are seeing data, so what are we reading? And the answer is, okay, we're literally leaking from the component in the middle. We only leak data when we have some eviction that goes from the L2 to the LLC cache. And every time data passes through those caches, we see that, and we can leak that. And this component is the superqueue. No one knows what the superqueue is. I didn't know either. But basically, the superqueue is like a decoupling buffer between the L2 and the last level cache. And this decoupling buffer is used as a performance optimizations, and entries in this decoupling buffer are reserved by the CPU and used. So this buffer, as I said, contains data, and if you know MDS attacks, they were leaking data from line fill buffers. This is line fill buffers between the L1 and L2 cache. Now the question is, what is happening here? We are leaking data that is contained in the superqueue. We should try to understand, okay, what kind of data are we leaking? And as we mentioned, we only leak from those undefined ranges in the APIC MMIO region. So first of all, we cannot leak from the 0 to 4th byte of every cache line, since those bytes, if you try to read the APIC MMIO region from those bytes, you will just read the defined values in the APIC. So you cannot leak those bytes. And I have no idea why, but we only observe data that is in even cache lines. This is very strange. We don't have an answer to that. But the only data that we observe while we're leaking with APIC MMIO, dumping the APIC MMIO, is only in even cache lines. But I will demonstrate that this is way enough to pawn a system. So we know that we leak data from the superqueue. The superqueue is this buffer that is contained in the middle, and every time data is there, we are leaking those data. If we think about it, what is happening inside the CPU is that the CPU is reserving entries in the superqueue to give you the answer for the data that you are requesting from the APIC MMIO region. But what should you do when you're programming something like that? You are reserving an entry, you should initialize the entry to 0, and then override the parts. And what is happening here is that the CPU is returning uninitialized data from an internal CPU buffer that it gets reserved for the memory request. And what is happening is that it doesn't initialize all the entries in this entry that is giving back to you. and only one entry gets overridden, that's the defined APIC MMIO ranges. And the other entry contains uninitialized data. And that's the data that you get and you leak from. But the problem here is that, okay, this attack is very, very cool. You can literally dump a region from physical memory and leak data. But the problem is that, as I said, you need to access physical memory. So you need to map the APIC MMIO region. And the APIC MMIO region is like a really privileged area inside the CPU. And to access that, you have to map like physically that memory. So you have to be at ring 0. So this seems like a very powerful attack, but you need like kernel primitives to leak those data. So is this useless? I think here, like the CPU world was very lucky that such a powerful vulnerability was prevented just by the fact that this is a privileged area. But okay, we need a kernel to leak those data. But there is something that in the CPU should protect you even from kernel attackers. And that's, oh, come on. And that's data that is in SGX-enclaves. SGX-enclaves in CPUs are this, I would say, special region in memory that should protect you even if you don't trust even the operating system or the hypervisor. Let's think about it if you, I don't know, rent a server on AWS or Google Cloud. If you want your data to be secure even against Google Cloud, you will use an SGX enclave so that those data cannot be leaked even from a malicious hypervisor. So what is like SGX in a nutshell? It's just like isolated environment that should protect you from any kind of attacker, even the most privileged ones. Come on, but it's okay. It transparently encrypts those pages that are the one that should be protected. It's like it reserves a region in the physical memory that's called APC, enclave page cache. And those memory regions are transparently encrypted, meaning that if you read those memory regions outside of an enclave, you will read garbage data. While if you read those regions inside an enclave, you will read actual data. And these pages can be moved between the enclave page cache and RAM by particular instructions. Moreover, these enclaves are like lightweight processes, so they need to manage interrupts and like this kind of stuff that can happen to processes. So they even use a save state area so that the registers that are using during the execution are protected and saved in the APC, so that even if the, for example, operating system constantly interrupts the enclave, cannot read the register values. I will use this since I'm done with that. So these registers, this SSA region stores the enclave state during context switches, and it even includes register values. So we already know that we can sample from SGX enclaves just using the exploit that I showed you before. You can literally just dump the APIC while an enclave is running, and you will get data that is used by the SGX enclave. But this is not enough, come on. We want to leak interesting data. We should try to think, okay, can we force target data inside the superqueue so that the data will be there, and dumping the APIC MMIO region, you can like literally leak the data that you want. And since reading the data from the APIC MMIO region is kind of slow, can we keep the data inside the superqueue long enough that, okay, it's there, but it will be there while we leak that from the APIC MMIO region? And to overcome both of the challenges, we designed two different techniques that I will present you. The first one is enclave shaking. The idea of enclave shaking is to force the data that you want to leak into the superqueue. We abuse the instructions that are AWB and LDU for page swapping. So the AWB instruction encrypts a page from the APC and stores it to the RAM. And the LDU instruction does the opposite and takes a page that was encrypted in the RAM and puts back into the APC so that it can be used by an enclave. But let's try to think what is happening when we execute those instructions. So we have our RAM, and inside the RAM, there is this dedicated memory region that is the APC, which is encrypted by enclaves for enclave execution. That's the APC. And we have a page in that memory region. When we execute the EWB instruction, we want to put that page outside of the encrypted memory so that we can like use more memory, save it, swap it out, or whatever. What is happening here? To encrypt, you have to like do computation inside the CPU. So it literally passes through all of the caches that you can have inside the CPU. And what is happening? It's passing through the superqueue. So we have this way of selecting pages in memory and making them go back and forth into the superqueue so that they will be there, and we can try to force them data that we want to leak into the superqueue. And same thing happens for the opposite. When we have an encrypted pages in the normal RAM, with the LDO instruction, we can decrypt it and put it back in the IPC. And as well here, what is happening? We put the page into the into memory, into all the caches in the superqueue then, so that we have those data that we can leak from. The problem here is that we are moving whole pages. And while we're doing this, we'll have like 4K bytes passing through the superqueue. And this is too much bytes to be able to leak all of them and leak interesting ones. And the problem is that we may be interested to target some data that you want to leak, not a whole page, or you will be not fast enough to leak one whole page. So we also introduce cache line freezing. And the idea is that, okay, we want to keep data in the superqueue, selecting the data that we want to leak long enough so that we can leak those data. So as I said at the beginning, the attack, like by default, doesn't require hyperthread. And if you think about it, I never mentioned hyperthread up to now. So we are not using the other hyperthread that sits in the CPU to be used for. So we can try to optimize our attack by leveraging the hyperthreading. So we don't need hyperthreading, but we can use it to make our attack better. The idea behind this is the superqueue is shared between the hyperthreads. So if one hyperthread is able to affect the content of the superqueue, then we'll be affected all the content that we leak from those exploits. There is a theory here, and that zero block are not transferred over the superqueue. And this was a theory that, I mean, up to now, it felt useless. There was no application for this. But we will see how we can exploit this theory to leverage and selectively leak data from enclaves. But let's try to understand how this works. So we will have, like in our model, two threads that access two different memory areas. Let's assume that those memory areas are congruent in the CPU sets that they have, in the cache sets that they have, so that they will share the same cache lines, and that every time we'll access memory, they will contain those cache lines. So we will have thread 1 that is accessing one data, and this wants to load the secret to access, it wants to load a location that contains a secret to access it, just for its own computations. And what is happening here, the secret gets loaded in the superqueue, then gets loaded in the caches, and then gets accessed. Now we have our second thread. Our second thread will do the same, wants to access its own addresses, and here loads the data in the superqueue. They will contend on the cache line, so also on the superqueue lines. It will load the cache, and it will access. But we did nothing here, right? We just overridden our secrets. What the fuck did we obtain? Nothing. But we can be smarter. What if our data is 0? What if the attacker thread data is 0? So we remember that we have this theory that the zeros are not transferred through the superqueue. So let's do this whole thing again. The first thread, the victim thread, accesses the secret. It will load in the superqueue, it will load in the cache, and it will access it. Then we have our second thread going to execute. It will load the 0, but now what happens? The 0 will not be loaded in the superqueue. Actually, there will be something, probably like 1 bit inside the superqueue metadata that says, okay, there is no reason to write zeros here and then forward them. Since if the whole if the whole superqueue line is zeros, then you know that it's zeros. Why should you like waste time into writing that? So that's like a really small optimization inside the CPUs. But here, what is happening? The secret is not overridden when we access our data. Then, okay, the information that this was 0 will be forwarded. No idea what's happening in the caches, if the 0 is written there or just forwarded. But eventually, the 0 will arrive to the thread 2. But what we did here is to freeze a secret inside the cache line and inside the superqueue. So as long as we keep accessing our 0 data, the data there will be stuck inside the superqueue and can't move anymore. So these are the two techniques that make AEPIC Leak possible and make us possible to choose precisely what do we want to leak and exactly when we want to leak it and what. So the whole attack, okay, is very difficult as a figure. Not sure if it's understandable. But the whole attack here is basically combine the two techniques that I explained before. We have enclave shaking to make whole pages from like SGX enclaves go back and forth from the memory to the superqueue, through the superqueue to the CPU, so that the pages will like work inside the memory. And then we will have cache line freezing that let us select a particular cache line that we want to freeze inside the CPU. Inside, sorry, the superqueue. What can you do? With this, as we said, we can leak 3/4 of even cache line from any arbitrary SGX page, so that you can literally select which page, which cache line to leak data from. And you can notice all of this, we never had the enclave running. It's just sufficient that the data of the enclave is in memory. We don't need the enclave running. We are leaking data from the static data that is there in memory. We don't need the enclave to access the data. We can force the data to be accessed from the enclave. So the first idea, okay, let's exploit this. We want to start it and we want to leak, for example, data and code pages from the enclave. And how can we do that? First of all, we just start the enclave and we make the enclave to reach the precise point where we want to leak that data. When the precise point is reached, for example, the enclave maybe have generated private keys or has downloaded private keys like encrypted from the internet and decrypted them, we just want the enclave to reach the point where we know the data is there and we can leak that. And then what do? We just do the techniques that we saw before. We move the page out of the APC so that the data will pass through the superqueue. And in a parallel hyperthread, we will do cache line freezing so that the data gets freezed while it's passing, so that there we'll have our data. Then what do? We just dump the APIC MMIO region. Dumping that, we leak at the data that is there. And we will see the data that we want to leak. Then we want to repeat that process to be, I don't know, more confident that we leaked the right data and do it more than once, for example. We move the page back into memory and repeat all of it. So we have an iterative way to leak the data that we want to select from SGX enclaves, architecturally and deterministically. We can do even more. As I was saying at the beginning, SGX enclaves use SSA region to save the register. So what if, okay, enclave writers get smarter, let's not have like data in memory, let's only use registers. The problem there is that those registers will be dumped in memory when an interrupt is received by the SGX enclave. So that we do the same exact exploit. We start the enclave, stop at the right moment, move the SSA page, this time not a data or code page, out and back into the memory while performing cache line freezing to freeze the data that we want to leak. And then we can leak that just by dumping the APIC MMIO region, and then repeat. So unfortunately, we cannot leak all the registers, and this is due to the fact that we can only leak cache lines that are even and 3/4 of those cache lines. And in the table, you see the registers that we can leak. But those registers are, for example, most of the like vector registers that are used for AES encryptions, for example, or general purpose, like most of the general purpose registers that are used by the CPU. So we can leak all those registers. And we want to see this in practice, I would say. So here, we have an enclave, and we just start it, and then we dump it. That's it. What is happening here? OK, this was very fast, but what is happening here? We made the enclave to reach the point where the data is loaded in memory. And then we dump the page as we were seeing. Just by dumping the page in the APIC MMIO region and influencing what page are we leaking from, we can see that we leak the data that the enclave was computing on. And I don't know if you saw that, but that was immediate. That's why we are not using a side channel or any transient execution attack. We are just execute the enclave and dump it. And that's it. We can do more. OK, what if the data is in the registers? We do the same. And this was even faster. We just execute the enclave, stop it at the right moment, dump the APIC MMIO region while pointing at the right location that we want to do, that we want to leak through cache line freezing, and then dump the APIC. And that's it. It was literally like that. We just execute it, dump it, and we did our exploit. And I would say that that was super fast. So what can we do with that? I would say, if I would have to think about it, my recommendation would be, OK, let's just disable APIC MMIO region. This is a region that is not needed. There are faster, so this is the default APIC controlling region, but there are faster ways to control an APIC that are not needed, that are like more efficient. So if we can just disable it, then we're done. We don't have anymore that region that's leaking data. Intel said no, since they don't want to deprecate stuff. So they released a microcode update. This microcode update just flashes the superqueue on SGX transitions. This means if you have like a CPU that is like affected by this vulnerability, the vulnerability is still there. If you dump the APIC, you will still leak the superqueue. But what Intel did is just flash the superqueue in an SGX transitions so that SGX data will not be there when you leak it. But you can still leak data. And obviously, again, Intel recommends to disable hyperthreading, since if you like leak it in parallel, you will not be fast enough as a mitigation to flash the superqueue before the other hyperthread leaks the data. So that's the recommended mitigation. For who's interested, this is the timeline. This attack was discovered in December 2021, and it undergo a super long embargo of almost like 1 year, I would say. We eventually were able to present it in August at Black Hat, USA, where we, like Intel, the day before had the public release of the attack. But I would say this was like a super long embargo that was needed to be able to fix the vulnerability, even if they just flushed the like internal caches. Now I would like to conclude with like a thought. We saw a lot of hardware vulnerabilities, and we saw like a lot of issues that were affecting CPUs. We can try to see what's the root cause of those issues. What is happening here in CPUs? Like, why there are so many bugs? If we think about existing vulnerabilities, now let's not do into too much detail, but like zombie load that was leaking from like line fill buffers was literally use after free. Line fill buffers were allocated, and then they are allocated by the CPU, so used from other data, but they were also used, still used. And this was simply meaning that when you will access them, you will leak data. So it was literally a software use after free in the hardware. Spectre, we can see Spectre like as an out-of-bound operation. You have a bound check that is not performed, at least speculatively is not performed, so that you will access data that you were not supposed to access. This is still like, as in software, you are accessing an array over the bounds since you didn't do a bound check. It's literally a software vulnerabilities that we see in hardware. And as we said, AEPIC Leak here is improper initialization, meaning that you will use memory that is not initialized. So we are seeing a lot of vulnerabilities in the CPU that are literally software vulnerabilities. And what's the reason for that? It's literally that hardware is designed in software, like RTL languages, Verilog, and all this stuff. You will design and program literally your CPU with software. So it's, I would say, predictable that we will see more and more of bugs that we have in software, but at the hardware level. So thank you for attending. And today I presented the first architectural CPU vulnerability that leaks data from the superqueue, and as we say, it does not require hyperthreading and affects all, like most of the most recent CPUs. If you're interested to know more, we have a nice logo, a website to check it out, and a full paper that describes the issues in depth. Thank you.
So you said that for the exploit to work, you need to stop the execution in the right time. Why is it that needed for the exploit to work?
So you have two issues. If you want to leak from the data, or if you want to leak from the registers. For example, if you want to leak from the data, you will not need to be that precise. You can just stop the enclave when you know that the data is already in memory. For example, think about, okay, you are executing an enclave that has no secret data at the moment, but you want the enclave to download the data from internet, for example, or decrypt some data, and you want to leak the decrypted data. But if you want to leak a register, you need a lot of precision, since you're leaking a register, and the registers are changed online and every time.
Okay, so it's just if you want to leak some register, you will want to stop the right time. So you know that in some register there is I don't know, some special values that okay, perfect.
And if you're interested in how we are able to stop the enclave precisely,
I was curious also about that.
We leverage a technique that is called SGX step, and basically it's okay. The enclave code will be placed in a page that is code page, and you make that page not executable, so that when the enclave will reach that page, it will stop execution and trigger a fault, so that the operating system knows that the enclave is going to be executed in that page. Then you have another problem. Okay, you know the page where it's executing, but you want to know the extraction. So you repeatedly, you can count, okay, when the enclave reaches that page, how many instructions you want to stop the enclave after reaching that page. You say, for example, 10 instructions, and then every time you make the enclave execute a single instruction faulting, so you count how many instructions executed, and then you stop it. And that's the only way this attack is, I would say, slow. But okay, it's not slow, but slower than it could be, since you have to precisely arrive at the point. But for example, for data leaking, it's literally instant.
Okay. Perfect, thank you.
So I was wondering, why did you focus on that particular component of the architecture?
So this was, I would say, a long journey. It started with a completely different topic and talk. That was the second Black Hat talk that I did this summer. Was basically reverse engineering microcode. And while I was reverse engineering microcode, I thought of an exploit to leak decrypted microcode updates. And these decrypted microcode updates were basically, they were saved on an internal buffer of the CPU. As I mentioned before, you can move the APIC. So I started shadowing this internal buffer with the APIC with an attack that is called m0leCon by Christopher Thomas. I don't know if you know him. But you can shadow regions of the address space moving the APIC. While I was shadowing those regions, I started seeing that the APIC was not deterministic and something strange was happening. I didn't see leaking data since I was trying this on a CPU that is not vulnerable to AEPIC Leak. But I saw that the APIC was behaving not deterministically. So I got back to the Intel manual, so, oh shit, this is undefined behavior. And then I literally took all the CPUs that I had at the time and then tried everywhere to see what is happening. And then so, shit, that's BIOS data. And that was the warning string that was a BIOS string that I leaked, and so, okay, this is not supposed to be there. But it was a long journey, I would say, yeah.
So at the end of the presentation, you mentioned that there are bugs also because hardware is designed by software. So what would be your solution? I know it's a strange question, but would you change the approach or would you focus more on the software we use to design hardware to make it more secure in the pipeline?
I would say there is no right answer here. I would say definitely you cannot remove the software from the hardware, since now the hardware is too complex. You cannot reason only on like hardware signals. You need some kind of software to design the hardware. It's very hard. So like obviously, since you are approaching this as a black box, you only see the CPU from the outside. So as an hardware vendor, I would like invest a lot of money, but I think they are doing that into testing via software what you're making hardware of. So via fuzzing or static analysis, or trying to prove that your implementation is correct or something like that. I know they are doing that, kinda, but maybe it's not that effective, I don't know. But it's very complex, like it's billions and billions of components inside the CPU. So it's, I would say, most of them are proven to be correct singularly, but then you have to consider all the interactions between them, and that's super complex. So no idea.
Thank you.
So have you tried like writing to those APIC registers?
Sorry?
Have you tried like to write those APIC registers?
Yes, it didn't happen much.
Okay.
Then I would say it's difficult to know if, okay, you're literally overriding the superqueue entry, and then like is, I would say, how it's called, back and forth behavior. But however, the entries that you're using are not used anymore by the CPU. So these are entries that are reserved for the APIC. So, okay, you can, even if it was possible to write to those entries, then I would say it wouldn't affect much. So, say that, also during the embargo period, Intel released another attack on MMIO region that is super obscure and no one has idea what is happening there. They released only like security bulletin to say, we fixed this. And I think that attack, he had both directions. So you could write some obscure MMIO region, they didn't disclose what was that. So definitely there is more to discover there. What I tried, it didn't work. But if you have ideas, you're welcome.
You said that you was looking at another exploit while you observed the strange behavior of the CPU, but how much time did it take to you to get from that moment to actually get POC?
So the bug is so disastrous that I already had a POC. Like what I was doing was already leaking memory. And that was the POC, the first POC that I had. It was doing literally something else, but it was already leaking memory. So I would say that was the first POC.
Okay.
Then, okay, you isolate the behavior and then you start like optimizing it and, for example, fixing the, I would say, the performance and try to make it faster and faster, and then takes time, obviously. But I wasn't alone. I would say the second author, Andreas Kogler, is responsible for discovering cache line freezing. That is the technique of fixing the data that you want to leak in memory. Yes. But I would say it's an iterative approach. In total, I think from discovery to have the paper ready, it was like 3 months, something like that. Right. But I would say this was just due to the fact that the bug is so disastrous that it's very easy to exploit.
All right, thank you.
So I was wondering, did you do some research about AMD processor?
AMD?
AMD, yeah, obviously.
So
this affects only Intel, I think.
Yeah, so obviously we tried this attack on AMD, but it seems it's secure in this kind of, I would say, point of view.
Okay.
But I didn't have many AMD processors to try this on.
Yeah, because it depends on the architecture of single processor.
So this kind of attack didn't work at all on AMD.
Okay.
We tried all of the most common architecture from AMD. We also contacted them and confirmed that they are not vulnerable. But also here is, I would say, hard to say.
Yeah, just a question.
They are not vulnerable. But yeah, like what we tried, this is sleeping. Okay, you saw the last slide. But what we tried, okay. what we tried didn't work on AMD, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks again, Pietro, for your nice presentation.